Hello everyone and welcome to Total Quilter Monthly for April 2020. My name is Mark Garretts and I'm a National Floriani educator, and this month we're going to be talking about how to make designs for Mylar. Now if you're not familiar with what Mylar is a thin washable film that adds sparkle and interest to a design. We apply it to a design similar to the way we use an applique piece of material, but we use the Mylar instead. Instead of cutting away the material though, the Mylar is torn away, which actually makes it a little bit easier to use. Now the Mylar is shiny, but it's also translucent, so the base fabric color shows through. But most often what we use is an iridescent Mylar with an overlay of thread, and that iridescence amplifies the thread color and spreads it throughout the design. So we only need one Mylar color. Instead of stocking a bunch of them, we just stock the iridescent one, and we can change the look by using different thread overlays. So here are some examples of designs with Mylar. You can obviously see it in the A there, and you see the threads running back and forth, and that's kind of what gives it its color. You can see the iridescent effect if you look in the wings of the B to the left, and you can see the letters and the word Mylar there, and those colors are mainly coming from the thread that's running through the middle of the letters, and you can see that thread more clearly if you look at the big A at the left. Now, on February 28th, 2020, Kathy Quinn, one of our other great educators, did a video about how to design with Mylar in FTCU. You'll find that in the weekly video archives on the club site. And again, the date of the recording was 2/28/20, and she showed how to create designs for Mylar using FTCU, but the techniques she used are not available to us in Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter, so that's why I'm doing this video, to show you how you can do the same kinds of things in Total Quilter or My Decorative Quilter. So go ahead and start up either My Decorative Quilter or Total Quilter, and I have my grid turned off for this particular exercise, because the lines don't really do anything for us, and they kind of visually get in the way here, so I've turned them off. You can leave them on if you want, or turn them off. And I've got a thread chart down here of Floriani cotton, so you can choose that one if you want, or you can choose the standard Floriani palette. That's totally up to you. We really won't be concentrating too much on thread colors here, so again, that's not all that important. And of course, since we don't have a grid settings are kind of unimportant, but just make sure that you don't have snap to grid turned on, because even if you can't see the grid, that snap to grid will work, and it won't, it might get in the way. So just, you can see here I do have it turned on, so I'm going to uncheck it. So now I've got snap to grid turned off. Now, I'm going to keep referencing back to Kathy Quinn's video because we're going to contrast the two. Again, that was recorded 2/28/20, so if you want to look at that in the club weekly video archive, you can. But in that video, she took a shape, and then she created a Mylar version of that shape. So created a design based on that shape for Mylar. And we're going to use the same shape. Now, she used in the custom shapes here, she used star 005, and you have that same shape available. So we're going to scroll all the way down to where we see that one, and here it is. And it's going to come in. It's going to come in filled. We're going to turn off the fill because the fill's kind of just going to distract us from what we're seeing. So we're going to do that over here in the properties box by unchecking fill and clicking apply. And now we just see the outline of that star. Now this star is artwork. It's not going to stitch. And when we do a Mylar design, we need basically 3 elements, kind of like we do with a applique, and we need a special 4th element that we generally do not use during an applique. So the first thing we need is we need a placement line, and that's a line that goes around the outside of where the design is, and shows us where to put our Mylar down onto the base fabric. And so that's just a simple run stitch, and it's done in the shape. And that's the same thing that we do for an embroidery applique. And then we need a tack down line to hold that Mylar in place and also give us something to tear against. And again, that's another run stitch. Now, in the case of an applique, it's inset a little bit from our placement line. For Mylar, we don't really care about that because it's going to get torn, so it can go right out to the edge of our placement line. And that actually makes it easier to do. We need a finishing stitch to kind of cover the edge usually, and then we'll need the fourth special thing, a stitch inside the design to make that thread color blend into the Mylar color and give us that color of that combined effect all the way throughout the design. So we're going to go ahead and create the various elements here, and we're going to do basically the same thing Kathy did for the first two things, which is we're going to come down here to our run stitch, one click, and we're going to click that, and that's going to create a run stitch. I will turn on 3D so the stitches get a little bit easier to see. You can see I've created that run stitch here. I'm going to jump back up and reselect my artwork, and then I'm going to create another run stitch right on top of it by simply clicking the run stitch conversion icon again. Now that's made it in the same color here, which is Floriani Cotton Wine in my case here, and I'm going to change that color because we want the machine to stop after it stitches this run stitch here. We want it to stop so we can put our Mylar down over it and then do our tack down line. So I'm going to change that color. Really doesn't matter what I change it to. I'll just pick this green, and you see that brings it out as a separate color here, and that's going to cause your machine to stop and ask for the next color. Now these colors are not really important. What you'll want to use is the color that you will use for the final color here, and even though the machine's going to tell you to change the color, you really don't. So that's the first two steps. That was pretty easy. And now what we need to do is we need to add in our lines that go across here that give the thread, that give the Mylar the color of the thread. So it picks up that thread color and shines it throughout the Mylar and makes that Mylar look like it's that thread color instead of just the base Mylar color. So I'm going to go back to my artwork one more time, and now I'm going to add a fill in here that's going to give us that thread effect. Now this is where it's different from what happens in FTCU. In FTCU, Kathy used the mesh fill, which runs a straight line back and forth through the design, which is generally what you see a lot in Mylar designs. If you go back and look at that B that we looked at in the very first very first set of slides in that design example, you'll see through that big A, you'll see straight stitches running through it, and that's done basically kind of with a mesh fill. We don't have the mesh fill in in Total Quilter or in my decorative quilter like they do in FTCU, so we need to use something different. So we have some options of things we can do that they can't do in FTCU. So probably the most useful two fills to put in for Mylar designs would be this one down here, which is our contour fill, or our shape echo. So let's start with contour. Now what contour is going to do is it's going to take this outside shape and it's going to contour it around into the center in that shape. And if I click that, it's going to give me a star-like design going into the center. And that's actually a pretty good spacing for Mylar. And so if I was going to do this particular type of fill, I would just leave that like that. I would just leave it as a contour fill. I wouldn't change the spacing, and just so you know here, the density of that fill is a 2 for this particular design at this size. And so if I wanted to use that contour fill, again, that I would just stay right here. This looks pretty good. The other option you might want to use for a different effect would be the shape echo. And what shape echo does is it takes one of the predefined shapes here and echoes it all the way out to the outside. And so here we have a lot of different options. We can choose a lot of different shapes. Here we have one that looks very similar to the star, although it's a different orientation. We have something that's kind of different, like a POW. I've got this curved diamond here, which I like a lot. So I'm going to choose that one, and let's see what that looks like. Again, that spacing for Mylar looks really good. If you like the way that looks, you can go ahead and keep that. We can come back down to that icon one more time and choose something different. So we can play with this for a lot. We could choose a circle, and that's going to create a circle design in there. That spacing's maybe a little bit far from Mylar, so we might want to tighten up that density a little bit, like maybe come over here and make it a 6 and click apply. And that looks pretty good for Mylar right there. I'm going to go ahead and undo both of those, and I'm going to put in a different shape. Let's go ahead and click that shape echo icon again, just to show you some of the different things you could do. What happens if I pick that star 2, which looks kind of like our star? So it looks like the star, but it's angled a little bit differently. So those are some options. Another thing you can do, if we go to a different shape, let's go to, say, a square shape. See if I have a square here. Here we go. Here's a square. And that gives us an effect similar to the mesh fill, except the lines are going in a square. And I just want to show you one other thing, or a couple of other things you might do. You're not limited to this kind of a linear design. You could put in a texture fill or an applique, advanced stippling fill. So those two are right here. You could even put in stippling if you want. If you wanted to put in a stipple effect, you could click stipple and do that. Or you could do advanced stippling, which is going to give you a repeating shape. And you want something that doesn't have an effect like this. So you don't want something that has a big open space as part of the design. You want something that's fairly filled in a lot, like say Stipple 05 here. So it gives you a fairly even coverage, and you may or may not like the way that looks. Of course, you can change the pattern size to make it a little tighter. We could go down to a 10 and click apply, and you could even mix designs here. But let's take a look at some texture fills, what you might do with that. Again, you want something that's fairly filled in and fairly regular, so 257 might be a good one. Again, that's a little bit big for Mylar, so let's make our pattern size. Let's actually make it about an 8 and click apply, and that looks pretty good. Another thing you can do with this, with the shape tool, is you can change the angle of this so that it looks a little bit different. So let's change the angle like that and make it go like that. So you can get all different kinds of effects. And just to show you what I did there, I'll undo that. And what I did was I went here to my shape tool, and this line that was going across here, this is my angle line. So I just grabbed one of the ends of it, the black circle, and I just dragged it over to here, and then I right click to lock that in, and I got that new angle. So there's all different kinds of things you can do with the shapes in here. But let's go back to something more straightforward. Let's go back to our shape, our contour fill rather. And it's a little tight right now, I think. Oh, no, that's pretty good for Mylar. Let's leave that alone. And let's go ahead and say that that's going to be what our final design is going to be. We have one more thing we need to do, and that is we need to go and put a finishing stitch around the edge if we want to. We don't necessarily need to, but it's going to help hold down the edge of that Mylar. So once again, I'm going to come back to my slate blue, and that's my artwork. So the rest of these are all stitches. I'm going to come here and select my artwork one more time, and I'm going to use a steel stitch around the edge, and that is, whoops, I didn't mouse click in the right place. Let me undo that. Select my artwork one more time and click steel, and that gives me a steel stitch around the edge. That's a little bit fat. I'm going to change it to 2 millimeters instead of 2.5. That looks a little bit better. And that's in the same color as my fill stitch. And that's okay. I can just go ahead and let it do it. If I want it to be a different color, of course, I can click on it and I can change it. Just one last thing. You'll notice our last two stitch elements, our fill stitch and our finishing stitch, are the same color, but you'll notice that they are two separate items here in the sequence view. And when we stitch this out, what's going to happen in our embroidery machine is it's going to stitch this color, and then it's going to stop and call for the same color again. Now, if this was a separate color, that's what we want it to do. Or if we needed to do a step in here, that might be okay. But we really probably just want it to go and continue on stitching. So how do we make these into one item? Well, there's a couple of different ways you can do it. The quickest way to do it is to select both of them. So I'm going to click on the first one. I'm going to hold down Control on my keyboard and click on the second one. So that selects both of these objects. And if you have more than one, or more than two rather, you can keep clicking them. And then I'm just going to reapply that color. So it's this color right here, number 2, in our design colors. So I'm going to click that, and that's automatically going to take out the stop and make them into a single stitch sequence where it won't stop between them. Now I'm going to undo that because I'm going to show you the other way you can do it. So now I've got them back into two separate items. If I expand this second one and I select the steel itself, not the top level but the actual stitches, and I right click on it, you'll notice that there is an item here called Remove Stop. And if I click Remove Stop, that will actually take that stop for that item away and merge it with the one before it. Now it seems like you would want to remove the stop from the one above it, but you actually want to remove the stop from the one below it, and that does the same thing of merging them into one color sequence. So you can do it either way. The shortcut way, again, just click them both, reassign the color, that'll take the stop out, or you can click on the right click on the last item and click Remove Stop. So that concludes our lesson for this month, for April 2020, Making Designs for Mylar. I want to thank you for watching, and I want to invite you to come back next month for the next installment of Total Quilter Monthly.